Today I will be speaking about schizophrenia and its interaction with anthropology. Before I begin, I think it best to discuss some definitions so we're all on the same page. Schizophrenia is defined by the National Institute for Mental Health as a severe mental condition which affects the person's identity in the realms of cognitive and emotional capacity and behavior. One of the most well-known individuals with this condition is Dr. John Nash, known both academically for his work in game theory, but also because of the novel and movie A Beautiful Mind. He exhibited many of the characteristic symptoms of his disorder, such as paranoia, hallucinations, and delusions. What we as the general public think we know about schizophrenia is limited to what we have access to, and a majority of the time it's Hollywood reenactments taken with creative license or pop culture references to mental health conditions. Ultimately, this is an extremely watered-down version of what the facts really are. Schizophrenia is under current study in order to break through the idea that it could be a westernized culture-bound syndrome. It's been under examination for that purpose for quite a while. However, while the efforts to look at mental illnesses as a whole have been ongoing, the reality is that nuances in languages do not translate easily and vital information is lost because of it. Politics, although not really anyone's favorite topic to discuss right now, plays a lot into what is known about schizophrenia. NAMI, a coalition of advocates, ended up being the prime motivating force behind how Americans view schizophrenia. Before they worked with lawmakers, the general assumption behind an individual afflicted was that they had been neglected by their families, that there was not a social aspect to the disorder, but rather it was a completely biological phenomenon. This, although removing much of the stigma and associated shame from many people, also had two devastating outcomes. First, families who were not aware of their contribution to the exacerbation of symptoms no longer felt the need to rein in their negative contributions, which made the individual delve further into their symptoms. Second, physicians began prescribing medication based on biological factors instead of looking at the whole picture. All of this led to misclassifications of symptoms. For example, it is exceedingly common, especially in indigenous or religious populations, to hear or see a loved one in the period immediately following their passing. Although not culturally classified as schizophrenia, but as a symptom of grief, under the biological model, the grieving individual would be so classified. Schizophrenia leads to the breakdown of social structure for the individual. Because the individual has difficulty discerning what reality is and what is hallucination, they struggle interpersonal interaction and may be seen as antisocial. This divide between what is acceptable or not and what is physically real or not leads to not only a debate about who the individual is in relation to those issues, but also a subset of language specific to the individual. What this means is that the individual more loosely associates words with things. For example, a pen might be a paper skate. The way words are perceived is also affected, and it may be something as simple as a reduced rate of understanding, like a person repeating something and then catching on in the middle of the sentence, or it may be a little like this presentation in that it sounds like something recorded robotically. Thanks Google. In the early days of anthropological study into schizophrenia, the focus was on altered states of consciousness. This was almost immediately linked to shamanism and the trances which shamans go into in order to have hallucinations. Eventually the link was removed, on the basis of three factors. The hallucinations for a shaman were typically willingly brought on through meditation or ingesting herbs, while a person with schizophrenia cannot control their hallucinations. A shaman's experiences will typically be to seek out messages of hope and guidance, while a person with schizophrenia will be subjected to paranoid and aggressive hallucinations. And lastly, a shaman will usually experience a visual hallucination with auditory accompaniment, seeing a person who speaks to them, while a person with schizophrenia most often experiences the exact opposite, hearing something and perhaps being able to see the source of the noise. By linking the two scenarios, individual agency is removed from the shamans who seek to use their experiences for the greater good, but also from the individual with schizophrenia who is often at odds with their culture, but also themselves. Of the things which America excels at, mental health does not seem to be one of them. The three suggestions from multiple sources focus on that key point. The options available and the stigmas prevalent to afflicted individuals relies on the culture they belong to. There are several countries which are harmed not helped, but westernized medicine in the realm of mental health, including several nations of Africa. Finally, and perhaps most obviously, the methods which help a person in the United States will not be transferable to a country which is not America simply because the entire culture is different and therefore the struggles are not the same. In several studies which focused on the United States, it was determined that an individual with schizophrenia could be actively involved in their recovery, a word which is not typically associated with mental illness in America, and would actually do better if expectations were very clear to them. The location of the individual after hospitalization was also found to be a determining factor. Should the individual be returned to their families, the symptoms often came back more quickly and with a higher severity because the family members would not be trained in how to assist the individual. Being overly critical or hostile, even with offhand comments, were cited as detriments, but also helicopter parenting, or being overly protective or involved. As I mentioned, recovery is not associated with mental illness in America. Our main mode of dealing with mental illness, and a lot of physical illnesses as well, is that if there is a problem then there is a solution. Often, this solution takes the guise of medication. Other countries and cultures look to heal the individual in methods which look at the individual as a whole and a piece of a larger picture. Indigenous populations of America are cited as using both medicinal means but also attempts to fix the individual's social division by allowing the individual to exist as best they can. Latina populations, as a generality, bring the individual into their families and work with them to find a place in the world, learning how to use their disorder as an asset instead of a detriment. As a way to understand the disorder and the individuals themselves, illness narratives have been employed. These stories discuss the illness and the process behind what the current scenario is, but lends itself to creating a static image of the illness and the individual, as well as expands the possibility for biases. This occurs because of language barriers, but also because of who is asked to do illness narratives, which is oftentimes a person who fits the needed narrative. Instead of illness narratives, systems of experiences could be used. This idea includes the structure of illness narratives in that the illness is explained and an individual's experiences are related, however the story is fleshed out. The individual offers their interpretation of the illness, their ideals about meaning and purpose are included. This increases the likelihood of cultural competency because it includes things which are hyper-personalized and can be seen as representative of the culture that the individual belongs to. So instead of an explanation of the symptomology and the individual's biography, there is also a section where the individual might discuss how religion or politics or stigmas informed how they understand their place in their own cultures. So thank you and stay safe.